Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are coming out in 6 months' time, and speculation is at an all-time high for how these new Pokemon games will shake up the franchise. Each new generation of Pokemon brings about major structural changes, and Scarlet and Violet will be no different. The last few generations have experimented with form changes and more powerful moves. So I think personally that Generation 9 is the time for Pokemon to look at messing with typing. I've already made videos on the introduction of a new type, or the option of letting Pokemon have 3 types, but both these ideas felt drastic? And more than just being extreme, something about these theories didn't sit quite right with me. You see, for the last 3 generations of Pokemon, the new mechanic added was only temporary. Mega Evolution and Z moves both require a held item to activate. Remove that item and you can pretend Mega Rayquaza was just a fever dream. Dynamax doesn't require an item to activate, but more so than either of its predecessors, it feels very much intended for just the Galar region, a fact emphasized heavily by the story of the game. Adding a new type, or giving old Pokemon a third additional type, feels much more permanent. If Pokemon the past 3 generations has been playing Monopoly, this would be them showing up and buying a real house. So I thought about it some more. If the mechanics centered around typing and needed to be something more transient, what could that look like? The answer I came to, as you already know, is allowing Pokemon to change their types. I'm curious what you all think about this topic. So today's question of the day is, if you could change any Pokemon's type, what would you change it to? Anyway, back to type changing. Now, this would obviously be a pretty massive change, but there's a couple reasons why I believe this is a feasible option for Scarlet and Violet's major mechanic. First, there's a number of ways that would allow this mechanic to be temporary. By requiring a held item to activate, Game Freak can remove it from the game at any time they want by simply not putting the items in future games. Second, this is actually already somewhat implemented via Pokemon like Arceus and Silvally, whose types and attacks change depending on their held item, and even seen in a more limited way with Genesect. We've also seen another approach to changing types, with the abilities Protean and Libero, mostly used on Greninja and Cinderace, as well as moves which add additional types like Trick or Treat and Forest Curse, plus moves that overwrite existing typings in Soak and Magic Powder, all of which have been added in the last 3 generations. In other words, changing types is something Pokemon has been experimenting with for a long time in a number of different ways. When I was a kid, I actually played a bunch of the Pokemon trading card game. I remember being like 10 years old when the trading card game put out a new set which featured these Delta Pokemon with different types than they normally would have. To my 10-year-old self, these cards were the coolest of them all. Steel Electric Charizard, Fire Ludicolo. It blew my mind to see these Pokemon I knew so well in a totally different light. For all these reasons and more, I believe that next generation's mechanic could have to do with allowing Pokemon to change their types. Now, within that, there's a number of different ways it could work. First, the distinction of when a Pokemon changes its type. This can either happen outside of the battle, like being able to catch, say, a water-type Pikachu, or during the battle, by changing your Pikachu from electric to water during a fight. While the former is possible, it's most likely that it would happen during combat. Mega Evolution, Z moves, and Dynamax were all mechanics that could only be accessed while battling, and Scarlet and Violet will likely follow suit. Not to mention that introducing different types of the same Pokemon is a little too similar to regional variants.
Now, I know what you're thinking. How does Wolf keep cooking up such good video ideas? The same way I cook up great meals, with HelloFresh. Get mouthwatering seasonal recipes and fresh, pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door with HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. HelloFresh offers a wide variety of quick and easy meals that minimize prep and make cleanup a breeze. They have a ton of different recipes to choose from, letting you try new meals at your own pace. It can also help you save money if you're someone who eats at restaurants a lot. I personally love how many vegetarian options there are to choose from. HelloFresh is also the first carbon-neutral meal kit company. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGWolfeyJune16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Thanks again, HelloFresh, for sponsoring this video.
Now we get into the harder questions. Within a battle, there's different ways that type change could take place, and each one would cause games to play out differently. First, it could happen automatically under certain conditions, like how Cherim's form will update mid-turn if the sun is set up. These conditions could vary, like maybe your Pokemon becomes water type if the rain is active, or maybe they become a ground type if their health drops below 50%. If Pokemon were really evil, they could even make it random. Like at the start of each turn, your Pokemon has a 20% chance of changing its type. But I think that's unlikely. There's also the possibility of moves being the key rather than items. The Pokemon Meloetta has a move called Relic Song, which changes its form when used. If Game Freak were worried about these type changes being too powerful, they could even require both a move and a held item to switch types. While all these options are possible, it's likely that Game Freak will give players a more active role when letting Pokemon switch types. Letting players choose when their Pokemon changes its typing gives them more agency and control, and also allows the mechanic to be a more active part of gameplay. I think we can even get a decent idea of how this would work by looking at Mega Evolution and Dynamax. Both Mega Evolution and Dynamax function in practically the same way from a gameplay perspective. You click a button before selecting your move, and before any Pokemon attack, the game plays an animation before continuing the turn. It's easy to imagine something similar working here. Click a button, play an animation before the turn, boom, your Charizard is now Ice type. I guess it's also possible for it to happen before or after the Pokemon attacks, but I think it's more likely to follow a similar structure to Dynamax and Mega Evolution. Alright, so we know when we can expect the mechanic to happen during gameplay, but we still have some hard questions to answer. More specifically, how is this type change going to actually work? Can any Pokemon become any type? While we can't say for certain, we can take an educated guess. Z-moves and Dynamax were the central gameplay mechanics of generations 7 and 8 respectively, and they have something in common. Unlike Mega Evolution, which was a form change only possible for certain Pokemon, Z-moves and Dynamax could be used by every Pokemon. To me, this suggests that Game Freak sees the value in being inclusive with their mechanics. If your favorite Pokemon couldn't Mega Evolve, well, tough luck, kid. But every Pokemon can Dynamax or use Z-moves, even though some get special treatment on top of that. That being said, allowing any Pokemon to change their type is a lot more difficult to balance than going through and specifically choosing Pokemon to receive buffs. On the other hand, Mega Evolutions were so far from balance that even Mortdog couldn't fix them, so actually, never mind. Speaking of things that aren't balanced, we should talk about my subscribers. Currently, only 7% of my viewers are subscribed, meaning most people who watch my videos forget to click the sub button. I work really hard to produce high quality content, so I hope you'll consider subscribing. I would really love to get my channel to 1 million subscribers, and it feels more doable every day. Anyway, back to the video. The other issue with allowing every Pokemon to change their types is the fact that many Pokemon have more than one type. Let's pretend there's a held item that changes a Pokemon's type to water. If you give it to your Pikachu, great! We have a general idea within our system of how that would work. You give Pikachu the held item before the battle, and when you want to change its type, you simply click the special button, like you would for Z-moves, Mega Evolution, or Dynamax. But what happens if instead of Pikachu, you're trying to make your Charizard water type? You see, Charizard has two types, fire and flying. Would Charizard become a water flying type? Would it become a fire water type? Would it become a pure water type? Would it give the player the option of choosing which type they want to change? Would it randomly change one of the types? These questions are challenging to answer, but I'll give it a shot. I think there's a few ways to approach the problem. First, every Pokemon that has two types has them defined as a primary type and a secondary type. In Charizard's case, its primary type is fire and its secondary type is flying. So, you could make a blanket rule that you always replace the primary type and don't touch the secondary type. I think this makes more sense than overriding both of a Pokemon's types, though that is still a possibility. The other thing worth noting is that for every one of the other generational mechanics, there has been a hard limit of once per battle. Game Freak wants these mechanics to feel cool and powerful, and by limiting their use, they're able to raise their impact on the battle. I think it's very likely that whatever the new mechanic of Scarlet and Violet is, it will be limited to a once per battle clause, just like the others. Everything we've laid out so far seems like it could be plausible, well, at least to me. Going forward, I want to talk about how I think a mechanic like this could potentially affect the game. Before we do that though, I do want to tell you that I have one major flaw in our design so far: its appearance. Game Freak uses these new mechanics in part to make the games feel more distinct and exciting, as a way to drive sales. Pokemon is a series known for its sameness, and though the new Pokemon introduced each generation do help a lot to make a region feel distinct and exciting, if you're thinking about getting new people interested in the franchise who haven't played before, this isn't a huge selling point, as they could go play Pokemon Red, and to them, all the Pokemon would be new anyway. These big flashy mechanics aren't just to make the game more fun and VGC players more afraid, they're also here for marketing purposes. I'm personally confident that whatever the new mechanic is, it will absolutely look flashy and exciting. So, my issue with how we've discussed our type changing mechanics so far is it actually feasible to go through and create a different look for every Pokemon for every single type it could become? I think we all know the answer. I'm sure people would love it if I sat here and said that Game Freak is lazy and they'd never do something so high effort, but the truth of the matter is that a new Pokemon generation comes out once every 3 years, not even counting games like BDSP or Legends Arceus or the DLC. Pokemon fans love to complain, but the truth of the matter is that you can't have your cake and eat it too. While I would personally be okay waiting longer between games to allow for more time spent, Pikachu doesn't care what I want, especially as I buy the games anyway on release. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it isn't feasible to expect Game Freak to go through every Pokemon in the game, give it a different appearance for every one of the 16 or 17 types, and still have the game finished to launch in November. So I think that either 1, Game Freak won't let every Pokemon use this new mechanic, 2, Pokemon will only be able to turn into preset types, or 3, there's a reason we've never been able to change a Pokemon's type, and the new mechanic will actually be called Glorp Formation, and will allow every Pokemon to turn into the new Pokemon Glorp once per battle. I guess we'll see in November, but for now, let's talk about how Pokemon changing types would actually affect the game. First, the scenario where every Pokemon can change their type, and they can become any type they want. This happens before a turn begins, is a once per battle effect, and in the case that a Pokemon has multiple types, it overwrites their primary type. So what would this actually do? The biggest thing, in my opinion, has to do with a little mechanic called Stab. Same type attack bonus, or Stab for short, is a property of all Pokemon that causes moves used to be 50% stronger if the move matches one of the types of the user. In other words, Magcargo will actually do more damage with Flamethrower than Salamence, despite Salamence having a higher special attack stat, because Magcargo is a fire type while Salamence is not. So if you allow Pokemon to change their types, you allow Pokemon to have more stab moves. Pokemon is kind of balanced around the fact that in order to use moves that aren't one of your types, they're inherently weaker by virtue of not having stab. Of course, you'd need to be turning into the type you want to get stab on, which might not always be beneficial. Charizard, for example, currently runs the moves Blast Burn, Hurricane, Protect, and as its coverage move, Ancient Power, mainly to deal with other Charizard. Charizard does not, however, especially want to replace its fire type with Rock. It doesn't help with its weaknesses to Water, Rock, or Electric, and also doesn't really improve its general offensive coverage. Charizard would much rather replace its fire typing with, say, Ground type, or Dragon type, if your brain can even comprehend a Dragon type Charizard. If we think about changing types as a once per battle effect, it's unlikely that once you change types, you'd be able to then change back to your original type, especially if an item is involved. What that means is that, unlike Mega Evolution, which was basically no drawback and in most cases you wanted to click it as soon as possible, with type changing, you'd need to be really strategic about when you used it, and you'd lose both the defensive benefits of your original type and the offensive benefits of its stab type. As with each of the other big game-changing mechanics, something like this would not affect all Pokemon equally. Unlike Dynamax and Z-moves though, which are rich get richer mechanics, I think something like allowing Pokemon to change their type could help specific groups of Pokemon. First, let's talk about offensive Pokemon. Some Pokemon don't really care about their defensive typing because they tend to get knocked out easily from neutral attacks. These are Pokemon like Gengar, Pheromosa, Infernape, Weavile, basically anything that would normally hold the Focus Sash item. Pokemon that are fast and frail are normally a staple in competitive Pokemon, and they offset their low survivability with strong offensive presence. Allowing these Pokemon to change their type would give them another way of increasing their damage output, by giving them an additional stab. This can be compounded with the potential to grant an immunity to a type, especially as frail Pokemon benefit so much from taking no damage from an attack. Of course, these benefits aren't without their costs. I mentioned Pokemon that specifically like holding the Focus Sash item here, right? Well, as far as we know, Pokemon are only able to hold one item, That means that if they're holding an item to change their type, they aren't able to hold the Focus Sash item. And while changing your type and gaining a new stab as a way of multiplying your damage, it is at the cost of both your item and your original stab type, meaning other options like a Life Orb or Choice item might be more appealing for certain Pokemon. Another group of Pokemon that I think could really benefit from something like this are Pokemon that are actively held back by their typing. These are Pokemon with the requisite stats to be good, but struggle due to their enormous number of weaknesses or poor offensive coverage. There's no better example for me than Tyranitar. While Tyranitar has varied from okay to great across the years, in modern times it really struggles once powerful Pokemon enter a format. While it's been able to perform at the beginning of formats, when the rule sets tend to be restrictive and less Pokemon are allowed, once the really strong Pokemon get introduced, Tyranitar has a hard time. Tyranitar has the combination of amazing stats and a great ability, as well as a very deep move pool, but its typing is truly abysmal. In my top 10 worst type combinations video, I actually put Tyranitar's Rock and Dark typing all the way down at the 10th worst type in the entire game. Tyranitar's success in competitive Pokemon is despite its typing, not because of it. Now, imagine you could change Tyranitar's type to something more flexible, and take away some of its numerous weaknesses. Tyranitar's primary type is Rock, which, although it does allow it to benefit from Sandstorm, also provides so many weaknesses. Turning Tyranitar into a Dark and Poison type, for example, would take it from 7 weaknesses down to 1, and really allow it to make use of its excellent stats and good coverage moves. The last group of Pokemon that stand to benefit from this mechanic are Pokemon with 4 times weaknesses. Pokemon like Heatran and Gyarados in particular have a lot to gain here, as by turning Heatran into a flying type or Gyarados into a ground type, you can become immune to a type that otherwise would knock you out. Of course, the effectiveness of this can vary. Gyarados is a better ground type than Heatran is a flying type, because Gyarados actually learns good ground type moves. Using a mechanic like this as purely a defensive option isn't an awful idea, but the Pokemon that stand to gain the most from it are Pokemon who can benefit both defensively and offensively. With this implementation of the mechanic, I'm not convinced it would have that great an impact. Obviously, some Pokemon would benefit more than others, and it would likely be very annoying to have to play the guessing game of, is my opponent going to become immune to my attack? But if we compare this idea to the 100 base stats gained from Mega Evolution, Z-moves doubling moves base power, or Dynamax doubling HP, making moves stronger, and giving new secondary effects, it's easy to feel a little underwhelmed by simply changing types. One of the biggest things that makes this mechanic feel weak is that it requires the user to hold an item. Items are a big deal in Pokemon, so much so that certain Pokemon go from great to unplayable without the use of their item. By forcing players to forfeit their item slot without giving them a ton of extra power, the mechanic would likely be not as impactful as Game Freak wants. So, what if, like Dynamax, this mechanic didn't require an item? Obviously, you couldn't give every Pokemon the ability to turn into every type, but in exchange, you could allow certain pre-picked Pokemon to transform, kind of like how Gigantamax works. With this approach, we allow a once per battle transformation into a predetermined type, such as Venusaur always becoming Fire and Poison, that doesn't require an item slot. Thanks to the lower cost of this mechanic, as well as selecting only certain Pokemon to benefit, Game Freak would have a better chance to balance these transformations with the rest of the game. The nice thing is that everything I said before about which Pokemon would benefit from changing their type still holds true with this approach. The only difference is that now, the player doesn't get as much freedom. In exchange, being able to hold an item is huge, especially for offensive Pokemon that stand to gain a lot by having a new stab type. Being able to combine an additional stab option with an offensive item like the Life Orb or a defensive item like the Focus Sash allows offense-geared Pokemon to really benefit from this change. The other advantage to picking out certain Pokemon to benefit from this mechanic is that, just like Mega Evolution, you're able to go through and give Pokemon a new design, which solves one of our earlier issues of the mechanic not appearing cinematic enough. Of course, this does make type change pretty similar to both Mega Evolution and regional variants, though I'm not sure if that makes my theory more or less likely to be true. So what are some Pokemon I'd like to see given the ability to change type? Well, I'm glad you asked. I think there's a number of fun things that can be done by pre-selecting Pokemon to benefit, both thematically and competitively. First, the new starter trio I think would be an obvious beneficiary of this mechanic. We don't know their final forms yet, but I think switching the fire, water, and grass types of the trio to reverse their original weaknesses would be really fun. Alternatively, if the trio has secondary types, shifting those around is another neat way of connecting the starter Pokemon. Another thing I think would be fun from a lore and theme perspective is giving Pokemon back their original pre-fairy types, like Togekiss. Togekiss was originally a normal flying type, but when the fairy type was introduced in Generation 6, it became a fairy flying type instead. Now, fairy flying is pretty much a strictly better typing on Togekiss than normal flying, but I think a type change mechanic would help explain from a lore perspective why Togekiss was a normal type for many years rather than just never explaining it at all. There's a few more Pokemon that I think could do with a retype from a thematic perspective, but I realized that most of the Pokemon I would mention here, like Lugia and Charizard, I already discussed pretty in depth in my video on if Pokemon could have 3 types. So if you're interested in hearing about them, I'd recommend checking that video out. There is one Pokemon that I talked about in that video that I think warrants another discussion: Gyarados. Gyarados is not only an iconic Generation 1 Pokemon, it's also been pretty decent over the years competitively. Gyarados is a water and flying type Pokemon with good base stats and decent typing, but struggles due to its limited offensive move pool and 4 times weakness to electric. If Gyarados were a beneficiary of this type change mechanic, I think it could benefit from being allowed to change into a water and dragon type Pokemon. Water and dragon are a phenomenal pairing. Water has only 2 weaknesses, electric and grass, and dragon resists both of those. Additionally, dragon has only 3 weaknesses, and water resists ice. Moreover, water hits for neutral damage the steel and fairy type that dragon struggles with, while dragon hits the grass, water, and dragon types that water struggles to hit. The synergy doesn't stop there, however. One of the major things holding Gyarados back is its limited offensive move pool. And by that, I mean specifically its limited flying type offensive move pool. Despite being a flying type, Gyarados only gets access to one good flying type move, Bounce. And apart from Z-moves and Dynamax, Bounce is basically unplayable due to the prevalence of Protect in competitive Pokemon. Even with Z-moves and Dynamax, Bounce can be a liability, as once Dynamax and Z-moves are out of play, it's really unreliable. By allowing Gyarados to become a water and dragon type, you can give it access to another stab move, Dragon Claw. This would likely allow Gyarados to have a much easier time in competitive play, and to fill multiple roles. A bulky support Pokemon with Taunt, a Dragon Dance setup sweeper, a Choice Band Pokemon. There's lots of options once Gyarados has another usable stab move. I think Dragon works for Gyarados thematically as well, as it's the only non-dragon type to learn Dragon Dance via level up or breeding, and it's actually literally listed in the Dragon Egg group of Pokemon. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Pokemon if they could change their types. This video was a little more speculative than I've done in the past, but I hope you found it interesting and informative. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my approach, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.